In this episode of the MASSP podcast, we're kicking off Season 10 with Jason Messenger and Sidney Bailey IV from Portage West Middle School, who share how their team tackled offensive language head-on through their Risky Words initiative. What began as a reactive, disciplined approach has become a proactive school-wide movement centered on empathy, accountability, and student voice. Jason and Sidney talk about what sparked the change, the challenges they faced, and the impact they're seeing across their students, staff, and community. It's an honest look at how one middle school is helping students understand the power of their words and what it truly means to take care of each other. Let's take a listen. So enjoy your ride to or from school, your run on the treadmill, or however you like to listen, because another MASSP podcast episode starts now. All right. Well, Jason, Sidney, thanks so much for joining us for Season 10 on the MASSP podcast. I had a chance to check out a little bit of your presentation at EdCon, and I know you guys have had others kind of hit you up wanting to pick your brains a little more about this concept of dealing with offensive language at the middle school level. Obviously, it happens at the high school, elementary levels of course, as well. But this concept of dealing with these risky words. And so I appreciate you taking the time to hop on. And I guess really right off the bat, outside of maybe being middle school principals, can you kind of share like what really that led you to wanting to combat this idea of just offensive language, which has been around schools, test of time, right? Dealing with adolescents, as a building principal, I was no stranger when I was in schools. And so I guess, can you just kind of share what started this journey?
I think, so about 4 years ago, we started to see an increase in what I would even call racial slurs. And we were trying to figure out like when we would like deal with this, like kids didn't understand always like why that was offensive or why that would be considered a slur. And so we started off, and credit to Sidney, put a lot of time together, and he did after, once this happened, as a part of the consequence, there would be a lesson that we would have students do. And they would spend 2 lunches with Mr. Bailey, kind of going through this lesson and getting a little bit of background information about slurs, about offensive language, and how we have to be, in a school setting, we have to think about what we're saying. And so one of the things I think is really important that I would start this with too is Sidney and I have approached this whole process with the idea that, hey, we're talking about school and what's happening here at school. We're not going to get into what's being said in your home and how you're, what's happening at home. That's for the parents. That's for those families to determine what is appropriate and what's not. What we're looking at as a middle school is how do we do what we say when we say that we're about taking care of each other
here. Yeah. And, just to add on to that, we obviously at this age level, there's a lot of language that students are introduced to for the first time. And so we would have students in our office and, things have been reported to us. We may have received referrals, or a student may have made a report about a comment that was made towards them. And as Jason said, they may say, well, I didn't even know what that meant. And so my conversation with students, in addition to just teaching about what is a slur, what's offensive language, is just going over, well, let's talk about intent versus impact, and how it doesn't matter that you didn't necessarily know the definition of the word or know how rude or offensive or how hateful a term may have been. That doesn't change the impact of that word. And so it got to a place where, we were doing these lessons, and they were there, and the word started to get around to students that they knew that something was happening when these kind of comments were being made. But at a certain point, it came to us, and, like, what are we doing from a proactive range? Like this was our reactionary system that we had created. And we'll get into that more. But we wanted to think about how can we be more proactive. If this, whatever, as a building leader, that whatever lands in your office has probably happened 5 to 10 more times out there in the hallways that you didn't know
Yeah,
about. And so how can we be more proactive in addressing things that we may never see or hear because they're not being reported to us?
absolutely.
And so that's kind of how we got to this point.
So it started as reactive, almost like it sounds like to me a restorative, almost kind of like a setting where you're working with them to explain. So how did it switch then to this proactive measure? Are these lessons then you are taking out in, to be proactive in front of the student body before these incidents happen now?
So we had a couple different incidents where the victims talked to us a little bit about, why is this continuing to happen? What are we doing? And it really led, our whole team here at West that to really have a really strong look at this. And we started to think about it, and we were like, yeah, they're right. Like all we do is like the referral comes in, and we do this lesson with the kid, but we're not doing anything to prevent it from happening. And so what starts off is like, let's find out some more information about this. So we survey our students, and we kind of put it into a bigger survey about, the West Way here. So we're Portage West Middle School, and we have we live by the West Way. So we take care of each other, we take care of this place, and we take care of ourselves. And, I think that we did a survey with that, but we put some things in there to talk about things that their students are hearing, how they're talking to each other, how they treat each other. And when the survey came back the first time, the team was really taken aback by some of the things that the kids actually, it was anonymous, and they really laid it on, and they told us what's being said out there. And at that point, Sidney and I sat down, and we were like, we got to do something. We can't continue to do this.
That's great. I think I saw some of the data points that you shared in there, and so I'll have some questions about that in a second. I've always said that I used to survey students a lot, and I was always impressed with the feedback. I know a lot of people are always scared to put themselves out there, or, to get feedback from kids, because I always tell them, listen, adults can be nasty. So of course you're going to have a couple kids do something stupid, right? But like the majority of the kids will, if they feel like you're listening, will take that and give you really honest, thoughtful data. And so, I'm curious to know then, based on the data you got, how did that really drive or form what these lessons were going to look like?
So when we were able to take a look at the survey results, we already had our mind what we wanted to talk about, but it was very revealing to us, how students perceived their interactions with each other, how they felt students were treating each other in the hallway, if they felt like they heard racial comments or gender-based comments or any type of offensive comments that they would hear, where they would hear these things, if they knew how to report these things if this happened, what were some of the comments that they heard the most. And just by seeing that data, showed us that not only did we need to take time in developing a lesson that defined exactly what is offensive language, what is a racial slur, but at the core of this, when we think about what the West Way is here, when we talk about taking care of each other and all those things, it's really about just being kind. Like how can you be a kind person, and why is it important to be kind? Because this topic, as you can imagine, can be extremely heavy. And it's probably the first time for a lot of our students where they've had a direct conversation about something that, isn't necessarily addressed a lot. And so we wanted to make sure that at the core of what we were sharing, these offensive terms, the comments that are being made, things that their peers are saying, that what the data was revealing to us is that there are moments where we are just not being kind to each other. And why is that important? What does that look like? And how does that relate to racial slurs or offensive comments and making these kind of statements, or as was included in the survey, racial jokes, and us going through how there's no such thing as a racial joke. So it truly set the foundation of what we were presenting in our lesson.
You guys are a 6 to 8 building.
Correct.
Did you see anything different between what sixth versus seventh versus eighth grade was giving you? I don't know how much you asked because I know you wanted to keep it anonymous, or like different genders replying. I'm just curious if there was unique kind of points in there like that. And I have to imagine maybe some of the common responses you got, I'm sure some of them had to be like politically motivated type of comments, right? In some ways, did you see that being an issue or not so much?
A little bit. I think I would say this. I think what was really telling to us is that we heard it wasn't just one grade level. It wasn't just like our eighth graders. We had sixth graders that were reporting things too. And what really was like stood out to us was like when they had a place where they could list out like just comments that they were hearing. Mm-hmm. And the things that they put in there really were like this. I mean, I will say for me, it was disheartening. I was like, really,
yeah,
this
sure.
is what we're saying to each other. And it really led to something I think that was probably the most important thing about these lessons. Our counselors usually go once a month and do some type of counseling lesson with the kids. And they were thinking about this would be their counseling lesson. And after we got the survey data back, it became really clear to the whole team, but especially to Sidney and I, that this needed to be the principals. This needed to be like handled differently. And so what happens after we schedule we look at the survey stuff and we're looking at it and we're all like, holy cow, like I can't believe some of the things that are being said to kids here. Like we really need to step in and try to help. And, so Sidney and I like carved out and we actually went and we decided we needed to do this in smaller groups than a big assembly.
Yep.
And so we went and carved out and went to every social studies class, 6th through 8th grade, the first year. And it was a full week of us going and visiting classrooms, and we decided we would do the lesson together. It was a long week for the two of us because we all, you still got a lot of things going on to be the principal, but it was probably in the end, I think of it as one of the best weeks that we've ever had. We were able to go into classrooms and do these lessons. We spent time. It was also kind of cool. The social studies teachers didn't know, exactly how we were coming in, but we were also working on like engagement strategies and some other things with teachers. Yeah. And so we built in our presentation, we built all that in. So they got to see us in action doing the things that we were asking them to do. And we invited teachers that weren't social studies to come in, and we had a lot of teachers take us up on and come visit and go and see a lesson. And so it really, like I said, I felt like it was powerful for our teachers to see the two principals in there co-teaching, going through a lesson. And we took the entire class period to go through and do it. In fact, we ran over just about every single time. And one of us is having to send, how the teachers got to send out the pass to everyone to let them know that this class was held over. The teachers were laughing planning because Sidney and Jason were constantly like holding classes too long past the bell. So
that's great. I didn't even think of it from that lens, being able to model those strategies as just a secondary benefit. But I imagine for a student, and I'm curious kind of what their reception was. I would have assumed that maybe you would have divided and conquered or have a counselor lead it. But now that you explain it, I see a lot of power and like, look at this united front. This is what we're dealing with. And this is how we're going to approach it from now on. And just, this is why it is important. It's so important that we are here together spending all this time in front of you, not just a 10-minute little thing or once and done assembly which assemblies are great, right? Whole building assemblies can have purpose, but a lot of that information can fall on deaf ears, so to speak. So, were the kids pretty receptive to these lessons? It sounded like the teachers were. And then I would also like to know about parents and if you got any feedback from them at all.
So in terms of the students, I feel like there was an appreciation level that our students had, that we were even talking about this topic.
Great.
When we looked at the language that was being reported in that survey, one of the points that we wanted to make while delivering the lesson was to tell our students, we do not want you to become desensitized to things that are being said that are wrong. We went into like, where are you being exposed to this kind of language? And so it was kind of just a quick dive into the world of a preteen and teenage student. And to hear them respond and say that, whether it's through their phones or through social media. One that was I won't say a surprise, but it was an eye-opening comment, was that a lot of our students said that through gaming. In fact, when they're talking between players or people that they don't know, this kind of language is always being used. And so because of the frequency of which they heard it, they have gotten to the point where they assume that it was okay for them to say it. And so for us to definitively and make a concrete stance in saying that this is wrong and has no place here at West, students would come later and they would say, thank you for saying that, or thank you for putting a name to what's going on here in our halls, because this is already an awkward age. The middle school time, they're going through so much growth. They're going through so many different things, let alone all of the comments that are being made and things that are being said to students. So the fact that we were kind of jumping out in front, well, not in front because they're already being said, but we're jumping right into the mix, with these kind of things that are being said, like, hey, we know you're hearing these things, but here in our halls, they have no place. And so students, one, appreciated it, but then two, when things happened after our lesson, we were able to always reference our lesson to the student. Like, what did we talk about? Like, tell us what this is. Well, that's a risky word. And what do we say about using risky words? Or they will say, I didn't even know it was a slur, or they may say, well, I was just joking, or they will stop in the middle of saying joking. Well, I was just joke. Oh, right. There's no such thing as making it exactly. So it took a lot of that conversation that would happen when a student would come to our office, because they already knew, because we have set that foundation for the students. So it just provided us with a common language to be able to have with our students and even with parents, and I'll let Jason speak more to that. But when we would have to call a parent about a scenario, we could say, your child, we had this conversation in which they learned about these words and why they are wrong to say. In fact, we encourage you to ask your child about that lesson so that you can have a conversation about the components of the lesson. And so yeah, the students, I would say, just appreciate the fact that we took the time to do this, and that we established a stance and what our approach is to dealing with this kind of language in our building.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, it kind of add on to Sidney's, and I can talk about parents, but one of the things that came out for us doing the lessons, and they happened really quick, and we kind of made a shift in the lesson to make a really big point to kids about becoming desensitized to what they're seeing it so much that we don't want you to be desensitized. It's not okay. It is not okay for you to be exposed to this, whether you see it on social media, if it's on TikTok, if you're gaming and someone's, it's not okay. We want you to understand that it's still not okay. And that led us into being able to say, hey, we want you to know that if you hear it here, it's not okay. And we gave them some really good ways, a couple different options for them to be able to reach out to us. And we also used, I will say we used the state's okay to say here a little bit too. Like if a student was really didn't want to do that, we put that in there as something that they could do. If they didn't want to talk with Mr. Bailey, myself, a counselor, if they didn't want to email us and tell us this kind of stuff. So, I think, we gave them okay to say.
Yep.
We also really spent some time talking about the idea that your generation has something that many generations never had. You have direct access to both administrators. You can email us anytime. Since COVID, I think kids have become more adept at that. And I think I get more emails from kids. Sometimes it's just questions on things that they want to know about. A lot of times it's like, hey, I just want you to know something was brewing today and you should know about it. And, just the idea that kids understand that they have an adult here that they can report that to. And that led us into, something that we've done for a really long time. We reminded them from day one, we talk about, hey, we want you to connect and have at least one adult here that you feel comfortable with. And that one adult can be your person that you tell if you hear these things or if something happens, or if it's, and it doesn't even have to be said to you. It could be said to someone else, or you could have heard it from at a different lunch table. You're able to tell us that because anytime we say something and it offends someone, it's offensive language. And we need to be able to have that happen. When it comes to the parents, Sidney and I sent out a little thing that we were going to be going to do lessons in classrooms, and we were going to be talking about, offensive language and some different things. We didn't go into a ton of detail at the start because I knew that we would follow up and share more on the lesson. I really wanted all kids to participate, and I was a little concerned that we might have some parents not want their kid to be a part of this, politically motivated or whatever else. And so we made a decision, and we were transparent. We were what we were doing and going in, but we shared more of what the lesson was about on the back end and what they could do to talk to their kids and everything else. And the response that I got and that Sidney got from parents was so positive. So many messages. Thank you for dealing with this. Thank you for taking this on. Thank you for having this conversation. And I think it meant a lot. And we are, one of the things I guess we probably could have led with is like this is kind of a unique place when we talk about diversity. We have, the last time they did the survey for here, the language survey, 71 different languages spoken. We have families, we have such a wide variety. In fact, one of the old administrators that used to come in and volunteer and help and everything else, who was at a different school, would come in, and he said to me one time, he goes, this is kind of like the United Nations, man. Like you've got a whole, like this is, and no one knows it from the outside.
Yeah.
And so those, we heard from all our groups with positives about this lesson and doing it. And so, that made us feel good. I think Sidney's point about the idea that we could reference this lesson anytime this then became a situation, we'd always start with, hey, do you remember when we were in your classroom and we were doing that lesson on risky words? And inevitably every kid would be like, yep. And then they would know, like they would know, like we weren't debating anymore whether what they did was right or wrong. We were just now into the fact about, hey, you made a mistake. Let's move forward. How are we going to restore this so that you're back in good standing here in our community?
Yep.
We wanted to make sure that, the consequential side of it is important. It is important for a consequence to be received, but we also have the responsibility to educate our students as well, so that they understand the why. Like why is this wrong? How does this impact others? And so making sure that we have that approach of saying this is how we're addressing the behavior, this is how we're teaching, so that hopefully moving forward, the same thing doesn't happen again, or if it does happen again, we're able to reference exactly what we talked about already. Like, so there's no question in terms of where we stand, what our belief is in terms
Yep.
of that kind of language being used here at school, and that can be communicated to the students as well as the parent.
And I think about how powerful is it to be able to use that versus, which we all do, like pointing to the handbook, say, well, you guys were supposed to read the handbook with your mom and dad, or your
Mhm.
teachers are supposed to read the handbook to you on the first couple, like I was there. You were in the class when I was with you. We went through this scenario and we discussed this, remember? Like I just think how much more powerful that is to recall those learning moments. So, I would just love to know, and maybe it's in your data and it's quantitative, or maybe it's just a qualitative thing. What have you seen? I guess I should. How long have you been kind of doing these lessons and leading with the risky word initiative?
So this is about to be our third year. And so
Okay.
what we did last year is we developed a follow-up lesson for seventh and eighth graders, and we went into their ELA classrooms to do that. So we did the sixth grade, the full lesson again last year with all of our new sixth graders.
Yep.
And then we did a follow-up lesson with seventh and eighth grade
Great.
in ELA. It was a little bit shorter. It was a half a class period. But we went back and we just talked about it.
Yeah.
We, redid. We still did a lot of the engagement strategy type stuff and everything else. We still did a lot of that with them, but we did it as kind of more of a reminder and just hitting on a couple of these things, for that. This year, we're in the process of developing the third lesson. So a student that is here will have now receive a sixth grade, a seventh grade, and an eighth grade
Excellent
lesson that we deliver together. And we've decided to commit to this and continue to do that. We do spread them out a little bit. So we will be about ready. We're sending the survey out. We try to get about where we just finished the first marking period. Before we delve into this with sixth graders, we want to get them a little bit more, accustomed to things here before we jump into something like that. And so we usually do the sixth grade one here in November. Then we'll do the review for seventh and eighth grade around February. And so that we just hit it up with that. And I think that's a really big part of this, is that we realize that the work isn't done.
Yeah.
Our data has shown that we've seen a decrease in this, what kids are hearing and everything else. We still are seeing it though. I mean, I won't lie. As we shared when we did our presentation at EdCon, it's not gone away. But I feel like we're making steps to helping kids to do this. I think we've got more reports of it than we did before. And I think that's because kids are more aware that this isn't okay. I think kids were just ignoring it or weren't saying anything or like being desensitized maybe to this. So our reports and some of our referrals are up on this, but I think it's mainly because the consciousness of our students around this subject is more apparent.
And I think that's great too, right? Because this way students don't feel like they're not being heard. They feel like they're in that impacts your culture, which is sometimes hard to quantify, right? And so I think for people that are listening, it's going to reduce some of these referrals or instances, which is great, but it gives an opportunity for students to be able to feel heard, feel seen, and just be able to learn that certain things are just not okay. They don't have to go through, it's just part of school. We got to deal with it, right? Which is not okay. And so I think that's a really important piece of it that you highlighted for sure. So that's great.
I think too, I just want everyone to know that when we do have these incidents there is still, like Sidney said, there's still a consequence, which comes with a education piece. The lesson that we now use that Sidney used to do himself is done online. We use, and maybe a shameless plug here, I don't know that they're going to give us any discounts, but we use Navigate 360. They have plenty of lessons for us. And that became apparent too in all of this. Like, okay, so we've done the lesson, we've done this, it still happens. There's still a consequence, right? And now I think we feel very confident about the fact that when we sit down and this happens, like it is set for us, kind of like, this is what we're going to do. It is going to be some time out of class where they are working on this lesson and they are having to do this work, and they need to, like, everyone needs to know that this is going to be the case. It's made it really clear. Like Sidney said, kids can't say I didn't know. Kids can't say they were joking. One of the pieces that I think Sidney does a really good job in the lesson is, one of his parts is about how, when people hear these things, how they respond. And one of the ways that a lot of middle schoolers respond is they laugh nervously. Like, they laugh about it because they don't know how to respond. And so we call that out with kids. We're like, just because someone laughed about it doesn't mean that they thought it was okay. They don't know how else to respond to you.
Yep. That's a good learning opportunity for both people, the recipient and the person that is saying it, right? Because I remember hearing that from kids all the time. It's like, oh, again, the joking thing, right? But it's like, oh, they never told me that it was really upsetting to them, or they didn't like it. I would have, they a lot of times they do feel bad. Like, I didn't realize that. And so just being able to have that conversation really from both ends of who's delivering it and who's receiving it, for sure.
Well, it gives us a chance to front load that, in terms of saying, like, look, what is an 11 to 14-year-old supposed to do the first time that something offensive is being said to them? Like, yes, they're either going to nervously laugh, they're going to sit there in silence because they don't know what to say, or they may respond in a aggressive manner that then we have to address that.
Yep.
And the majority of the time it's that laugh, and so again, being very clear that is not an excuse or a reason to continue to say something, or to say, well, I thought it was okay because they were laughing. And we say, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, has anyone ever given you the words or taught you how to respond in those kinds of moments? And so we actually get into that during the lesson as well. Trying to empower our students to say, typically when you may hear these things, it may be from someone that you don't know, or it could be by your best friend. It takes a lot. We know that you get butterflies in your stomach, or you get that nervous feeling when you want to say to your buddy or a person, like, hey, that's not right. Or no, we shouldn't be saying it. Like, adults have a hard time.
I was going to say, I think of adults struggle with that too. That's another great aspect of this. So I know I got to get you guys out of here because we have both building principals are locked in an office meeting with me right now, which I appreciate. But if people want to get started, obviously they can reach out Portage West Middle School and probably learn more from you all, or get a slide deck. If somebody wants to get started, it sounds like really the first step of this is to survey your kids and just find out, what are they hearing, what are they seeing, and to kind of start with that, and then they can kind of formulate a plan of that proactive approach to getting in front of students to be able to talk about that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You want to take a look at, from an administrative standpoint, what do you value and what have you communicated to your school community that you value here? Like, for us, the vehicle that we were able to use to deliver our survey was through the West Way. And most schools have their PBIS theme or whatnot. So really think about, like, what bucket does this fall under in terms of what our school focus is. And so, one, if it's not a school focus or you don't see it there, maybe there needs to be some reflection on that, but then once you're able to identify that, yes, absolutely, survey your students, because they are the ones, again, who can be able to tell you, of all the things that are reported, you can imagine that it's happening 10 times more than what you will ever know about. So be conscious about the kind of questions that are on the survey. Ensure that the students know that their responses will be anonymous, so that nothing will come back to them, and then dedicate a time to decipher that data that comes back from the survey to determine what your next steps are.
Great
I
advice.
think too, like as you're starting to do this, you need to be thinking about how are we going to deliver. And like I said, it became really apparent to Sidney and I that this was worth our time.
Yeah.
To do this together, to go to all these classes, to deliver this message. I think in the past, we've all done these, like you talked about. We've done assemblies, we've done things like being kind and doing all this and campaigns and everything else. The time we spent being in classrooms with smaller groups and having them have some conversation about this. Now, we were limited in that when we talk about student conversation because we didn't want them to feel too uncomfortable. What we had them talking about was an article that we used that was a part of it that was talking about risky words and how people feel. But there was some other engagement type things that they did during that process. But I'll tell you, we walked away even though we were exhausted at the end of the week, and it was a great thing for the two of us to be back in a classroom, and teaching. And I appreciated that. It was, I got done the first day and I told Sidney, man, we got to do this again tomorrow. And so it was good for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, hey guys, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Loved hearing just how this all came to be and the approach and how you've been building it year after year, and excited to see how that will continue to grow. So thank you so much, Jason, Sidney. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week. And hopefully you'll hear from some listeners and members who want to reach out to pick your brain to see how they can start this similar initiative in their own building. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the MASSP podcast. Remember, you can listen to this podcast and others anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Just search for MASSP or hit the subscribe button right now.